Welcome to Starter TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton, and today I'm talking with Adam Galinsky, a professor of business and the chair of the management department at Columbia Business School, and the co-author of Friend and Foe. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much.
I'd love to know first, what advice do you give your students and young people in general who are entering the business world today?
One of the advice we give actually comes back to the title of the book, is that whenever you enter into a new job, into a new employment, you have to recognize that every person that you're interacting with is both a potential friend and a foe, and oftentimes they're both friends and foes at the exact same time. So for example, I'm cooperating with people at work to get a project done, to get a presentation done, but then we're also competing with each other for promotions and raises and some of the rewards that we get in life. And so one of the key things just to remember is that everyone's your friend, but they're also your foe.
What makes a great leader?
A great leader has a number of different attributes that I think are really critical. The first attribute that great leaders have is they have ability to see the big picture, right? To understand where the world is going, a positive, big picture vision of the future. The second thing that a great leader really needs is to be an exemplar of desired behavior. So we want our leaders to be courageous, right? We want them to be authentic and passionate. We want them to be consistent in how they treat people. And then the third thing a great leader needs to do is they need to be a great mentor. They need to develop and empower other people and allow them to develop and to move up the ranks and to contribute to the organization.
I feel like that last piece is a part that many people forget.
Yes, I think, in fact, some of the research that I've done basically shows is that power often takes away our psychological steering wheel. So as we drive down the highway, we forget that other people are on the highway and we start to crash into them. And so one of the things that leaders need to do is to really be great perspective takers. Ironically, power tends to take away the ability to take other people's perspectives.
You talk a lot in your research about the effects of inauthenticity. Why is authenticity and learning how to be truly authentic so important?
Authenticity is important for a couple reasons. One is that when we interact with someone who's acting and expressing themselves authentically, we trust them more, we like them more. But the other reason why it's so important is because your authentic passion is infectious and contagious to other people. I do this exercise in class where I ask people to describe for 1 minute a passion that they have. And then I have people switch and I say, well, what did you notice about the person when they were describing their passion? And the first thing they say is their eyes sparkled. The second thing is they notice they smile, this irrepressible smile. Third is that they become animated and they lean in, they get closer to the other person. And so you can start to see how you get sucked into that, brought into that. And so if you're authentic, you're going to basically create passion and authenticity in other people because it's infectious.
How can leaders and managers best encourage innovation in organizations?
One of the ways that we kill ideas in organizations is when people are scared, when they're threatened, when they're afraid to share new ideas. And so one of the key variables that's really important for innovation is something called psychological safety. The idea that I'm free and able to explore new ideas, to express them. IDEO is a very famous company, and they have very strict rules during their idea generation stage, which is no criticism. And if you criticize someone, they ring a bell in your face. Really? And this idea is that the way that we get people to be more creative and be more innovative is to give them the psychological freedom and the space to come up with ideas. Now, some of them will be crazy, some of them will be good, but if we just let people generate ideas, doesn't matter how crazy, later on we can evaluate. So one of the key things that research shows is that if you want people to come up with good ideas, you gotta separate the idea generation stage from the idea evaluation stage.
So they do this in different phases.
Yeah, and in fact, if you think about taking an idea from generation of the idea to the implementation idea, it's really sort of 3 phases. It's generating ideas, evaluating ideas, and then implementing ideas. And I've done a lot of work looking at social hierarchy, and the role of social hierarchy matters a lot in those things. You want no hierarchy when people are generating ideas, so everyone feels equal. But when you actually have to implement the idea and we have to physically coordinate our behavior, you need someone, in a sense, barking out the orders in the way that a general would bark out an order to soldiers as they march into battle.
How does egalitarianism actually make organizations stronger?
When we lack power, we're inhibited. We're constrained. we don't put our best selves forward. And so some of the research I've done is I've shown that when countries give every member of society more opportunity and there's more quality and power, everyone does better. So for example, we get more innovations from countries when women have higher egalitarianism, when they're more equal to men. We also get better performing male soccer teams when women have more power in a society. And the idea, because what male soccer teams is they need talent, and if we're giving opportunities to women, we're probably also giving opportunities to lots of other different groups, and that's going to allow the men soccer teams to be more successful. And so what you do when you create egalitarian opportunity is that you're able to capture the best talent. And that's going to make organizations be better, countries be better in business and athletics.
How can being in the position of the least powerful affect your negotiations?
One of the things that we've shown over and over again in my research is that when people lack power, they're inhibited, as I just said. And one of the consequences of that is they become less ambitious in their goals. They're less likely to make the first offer. And some of the research that I've done and lots of other people have done is that there's a strategic advantage in negotiations to making the first offer. And so one of the things that we've shown in our research is that if you can get a low power person, but ask them to do a really simple little process before they negotiate, just think about a time when they had power. To get into a high power mindset, they're more likely to come in with confidence, with ambition, and more likely to make the first offer. And that leads to better outcomes. So just to give you one example outside the realm of negotiation is we had people go in for business school interviews. And we had a third of them think about a time when they had power, a third of them think about a time when they had lack power, and then a third were sort of in the baseline condition. And we showed that there was a dramatic boost in interview success when they thought about time when they had power, but there was a dramatic reduction in success when they thought about time when they lacked power.
Is there a physicality that goes along with that mental state?
Sure. One of the things that I've pioneered is this idea of the power recall, like to prime the mind by thinking about time when you had power. Other people like Amy Cuddy and Dana Carney have talked about power posture or power posing, where we put our chest out and we do this sort of in the bathroom to prepare ourselves and stuff like that. I think that, other research that I've done has shown that when you give people music with sort of fast-paced and a lot of bass, it makes people feel more powerful. So we gave people 50 Cent's Into Club, and they then felt more powerful and acted more powerfully. And so whether it's recalling a time you had power, music, or a pose, any of these things, you want to pick the one that works best for you, but they all have shown some scientific evidence. The recall prime has the most scientific evidence because hundreds and hundreds of studies have been done about that. And you can understand why that one's so important, because if I close my eyes, I think about time I had power, I really get back into that mindset. The power posture is very effective for some people, but some people feel kind of silly and foolish doing it. And so I think the power recall one is sort of the one that I think really sort of has the most scientific evidence behind it, and the one that I think really activates that sense of power in a more internal and visceral way. For me, when I first started teaching, I would get very nervous, and especially when I'd go to a foreign audience, like an executive audience of some CEOs and CFOs and CEOs. And then one day I realized, but I've never failed. And it's like, I know what I'm doing. And so what I would do then is I would just remind myself, think back to a time when I did feel really comfortable teaching, and then it was much easier to go into a lecture and be more confident.
What do our voices have to do with our level of power?
Yeah, I teamed up with a collaborator of mine who went to music school, has studied voice, really knows how to analyze voice using sophisticated technological analysis. I mean, one of the things that we found is that if I randomly asked you to think about time when you had power, and then I asked you to make a little speech, you'd notice two things that would happen. First is your pitch variability would go down. And what that means is you have a steadier voice, but your volume variability would go up. You would speak, louder sometimes, but softer sometimes. And so what you did is you had this dynamic voice, a voice that changed volume, but kept a constant pitch. And what's really amazing, after we published this research, we noticed that people had done analysis of Margaret Thatcher's voice before she was prime minister and after she was prime minister. And her voice analysis completely replicated our experiment. Her voice became steadier, so less pitch variability, and with more volume variability. So she learned to control her voice. I can speak loud to make a point, or I can bring you in by speaking a little bit softly. And that dynamic, while also maintaining a constant pitch, is really the hallmark of a powerful voice.
Can your level of international travel experience or multicultural experiences actually have an effect on your marketability and your career?
Yeah. It's funny you brought up the word travel and live abroad. And so I've done a lot of work. I've done over 10 years of experiments and research and longitudinal studies looking at how foreign experiences impact people. And one of the key things is that we found that living abroad predicts creativity, but traveling abroad doesn't. And so you might ask yourself, why would that be? You're getting exposed to foreign cultures. And it's because when you live abroad, you're more likely to really integrate and adapt to the local culture. And I'll just tell you about, I think my favorite study that we did with this is we took every fashion house in the world, major fashion house. That means they presented their lines in the fall and spring in Milan and London, Paris and New York. And we took these major fashion houses all over the world, and we looked at over 22 seasons, so 11 years, and we looked at the foreign experience of the creative directors. And what we found is that when a creative director of a fashion house had spent time working abroad, the entire fashion house became more creative. And that makes sense because the creative director is the one in charge of the fashion line. What was the really key variable was not how many countries they went to, but was how long they had lived abroad. And so again, getting back to this travel versus living, going to lots of countries wasn't sort of as successful as going to one country and spending more time there.
Does this have to do with the brain changes that happen when you immerse into something new or learn?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of neurological
things?
evidence. For example, one of my favorite ones is they looked at the neurological patterns of taxi drivers who were driving familiar routes or new routes. And you could see these really sort of changes as they learn the new route and it becomes sort of embedded in the memory. And because of, I think, those memories and those neurological changes, then when you, let's say, you grew up in America and then you end up going, let's say, to France, and then you come back to America, you're able to integrate those experiences of France back into seeing new ways of conceptualizing the world and new ways of offering new ideas, yeah.
So you literally see things differently.
Yeah, you literally see things differently, yeah.
So tell me, why did you want to write Friend and Foe?
Well, I wanted to write Friend and Foe because I wanted to collaborate with one of the greatest friends and researchers in the world, Marie Schweitzer. So that was sort of the impetus behind the book. In fact, we started thinking about writing a book together even before we had the idea for the book. So it's the idea that I've been a long admirer of his research, and one of the great things about collaborating with Maurice is we have a lot of similarity in our interests, but also clear differences in some of the things that we've studied. And so one of the most amazing things about the book is that it's 11 chapters, and sort of 5 of the chapters focus on some of the areas where I have a little bit more experience, about 5 that Maurice does, and then 1 chapter, negotiations, where we both have deep experience. And so it was a really great experience to be able to sort of collaborate on these different aspects. I think the second impetus for this book is a fundamental belief that recognizing that we're friend and foes with everyone is an unbelievable source of learning and knowledge that can help people's lives. And just take the example of new parents. New parents are friends. They're collaborating to raise this child, and they see the pictures where they're looking longingly at their infant kid. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, they're competing with each other. Who's going to get to sleep and who's going to have to get up with the baby. And so even there you see that siblings are constantly collaborating and competing with each other. And awareness that almost all of human nature is driven by this tension between cooperation and competition. But if we can harness that understanding and recognize it, we can make wiser choices, we can navigate our social more effectively, and we can produce better outcomes for ourselves and others.
So how can you determine, in the workplace in particular, when should I compete? When should I collaborate or cooperate?
So I think the key insight of our book, and this is one I just want to stress over and over again, is we're always collaborating and competing, often at the same time. So as we're working on that project, we're collaborating, but we also want to signal to our boss that we're really the ones doing the great job here. And so we're constantly in that situation. But one of the things that Reese and I talk a little bit about in the book is this idea that it's almost always better to start with collaboration. Right? So there's a very famous thing called the prisoner's dilemma. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's a dilemma of 2 prisoners are in different rooms and they have to decide whether to stay the course and not rat each other out, or rat each other out and try to get a better course of action. And you can play this game over and over again. And they asked all these scientists around the world to come up with the best strategy for playing this game. We keep having to make a decision, cooperate or compete, over and over again. And what they found is the single best strategy was tit for tat. start with cooperation. As soon as someone competes with you, compete back hard. If they then collaborate again, go back to cooperation and go back in that thing. So start cooperation is the key, but then don't be exploited by knowing when to compete.
How did this competition collaboration dynamic work with you and Maurice while writing the book?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was a great collaboration. Maurice is a better writer than me, and he's taught me a lot about how to be a more effective writer. And we edit each other's chapters, and he made those chapters better all the time. But there is some competition, which is, what's the order of the authors going to be on the book? Now, we contributed literally equally. I can't imagine more equal collaboration, but there's a convention, which is the name that comes early in the alphabet goes first. Now, if we'd switched it, it would have been sort of a big deal because it would have been said, oh, Maurice did a lot more on it. So there's a little bit of competition there. Now, because through the grace of God, my name's earlier than his, my name's first, but that's just the convention. But that's sort of one example where you can even see this process crop up and stuff like that.
What does your research say about hierarchies?
Yes.
Which is something that so many organizations and companies have actually been trying to eliminate.
First of all, hierarchy is the most common, dominant form of social organization that exists in every culture in the world. In every animal species in the world. Think about ants or the bees with the queen bee and the worker bees and everyone working together. And the reason why is that hierarchy solves lots of problems for organizations. The first one is, how do we cooperate with each other? How do we coordinate our behavior? I want to give you an example that we have in the book that I think it really captures this really well. Is, would you rather play a game with your boss or your best friend? Now, everyone would say, I'd rather play with my best friend. They're my best friend, right? But let me tell you about this little game that we had people, some researchers in the Netherlands had people play. There's two options. Option A gives me 8 points and gives you 4 points. Option B gives you 8 points and me 4 points. So option A is better for me, option B is better for you. Now, if we both choose the same option, we get the outcome. If we choose different options, we get nothing. Now, if you play with your boss, it's really simple. I defer to my boss. I pick option B. My boss deserves more points than I do. Your boss says, I deserve more points too. They pick option B. Now imagine playing this with your best friend. Well, maybe I decide to be generous, but they're generous. We pick different options. We get nothing. Or maybe I say, they're going to be generous to me, so I'll be selfish. But maybe they're thinking the same thing. And then now we're in the situation where hierarchy creates patterns of deference that make coordination really successful. Even here, right, you're the interviewer, you have an assistant who helps, right? You direct them about what to do here in this situation. It makes things smooth and coordinated. So when Google tried to eliminate managers, disaster. Zappos is trying to do this now. They had a 2% attrition rate 2 years ago. Now it's something up to 14%.
Really?
People are just not happy. It provides order, it provides control, and it provides coordination. Now, there's a flip side, which is that hierarchy can also kill. And the reason why this happens, classic example is surgery. When we defer too much to the hierarchy and we see a doctor make a mistake or skip a step, let's say, in the operation procedure, and we don't speak up as a nurse or someone with less power, that's a disaster. So what we need to do, and in the book, every chapter ends with a section called Finding the Right Balance. We need to make hierarchy win without killing. How do we do that? It's a term I used earlier in this interview, psychological safety. If we can have the benefits of hierarchy that helps with coordination, cooperation, with opportunities for less powerful to express themselves, that's how we can make hierarchy win without killing and get the best outcomes in life.
Can that actually happen?
Yes, it happens. So I'll give you 3 examples where you can start to see that happening. One is sometimes we give the less powerful a little bit of power, in a sense. So Johns Hopkins noticed that doctors often skipped steps in the checklist during surgery. This was disastrous because it could lead to infection. And if infection hits the main line, you're toast. So what they decided to do is, what if we put the nurses in charge of the checklist? Give them some authority over that. That's more likely to give that possibility. Here's another example. A friend of mine, Laura Nordgren at the Kellogg School of Management, has created a new app called the Candor app. And what he does is, it's an app that allows people to express ideas anonymously during a group interaction. So going back to the IDEO example, everyone puts their things on this and they all pop up on the board, and I don't know who said what, so it's just the ideas went out. So
you don't feel like there will be a consequence.
Exactly, right?
to expressing yourself.
So that's one way of creating psychological safety. I'll give you just one other great example of this, which Sheryl Sandberg has talked about in the New York Times, which is there was a TV show called The Shield. And the producer noticed that a couple of the women who were a little bit younger didn't really speak up in pitch meetings. And so he said, I'm going to be a good leader. I'm going to mentor them. I'm going to develop them. I'm going to tell them, hey, why don't you speak up? And they laughed in his face. And he's like, what? He's like, watch what happens when you do. And he noticed when they did speak up, they got interrupted really quickly.
Right.
So he created a no interruption rule. And it turned out that interruption rule not only helped these women who have a little bit less power in the group speak up more successfully, it actually helped everyone be more successful. And they came up with better ideas and better stories because of this rule. So we can use anonymous opinion gathering. We can use some rules that we put in place. All of these things, or give the less power a little bit more authority like nurses, all these things help hierarchy win without killing because it creates psychological safety.
You say that teams can suffer from too much talent. Why?
Well, if we just go back to the idea of hierarchy, right? Imagine a basketball team that's the most talented team, right? Who's going to get the ball at the end of the game? We saw this in Miami Heat a few years ago with Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. What's the pecking order? Who's the alpha dog? Who's the one that everyone's going to clear out for? And what you can see is that when you have too much talent on a team, you get a situation where they don't coordinate their behavior very well. So we analyzed 10 years of NBA basketball data.
You're fun.
And we found that at a certain point, talent helped teams, but you get to this point, all of a sudden your performance starts to go down. And we analyzed why. Well, we start to have fewer assists, more turnovers. We're not coordinating our behavior more effectively. Now, sometimes more talent is always better, and that's baseball. We also analyzed 10 years of baseball data, and we found that more talent is always better. Why? Because in baseball, we don't have to coordinate our behavior. And so you have to ask yourself, is my organization like a baseball team or like a basketball team? If it's like a basketball team, I need to have people who knows their roles. I can't have too much talent on this team. But if it's a baseball team, I can have all the talent I want.
Why is it that we expect women to be more kind and cooperative in the workplace? And how does this affect women's careers?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason why we expect it is because it's a vicious stereotype. And part of that stereotype comes from the fact that women have less power in society. Now, some people say, oh, women are mothers or they're nurturers. But some of the research that we've done shows that every low power group in society is expected to be nurturing and cooperative and deferential, right? And so it creates a double bind for women. And so one of the things that our research has shown is a couple things that I think are really important. First is that when women get primed with power, it affects them just like when men get primed with power. So we prime women with power before an interview. They also act more confident, just as a man who gets primed with power acts more confident. So one of the things that we've done is we've shown, I think, a pretty interesting finding, which is that many gender differences, sex differences, are really just power differences in disguise. And the way that we know that is we've taken 31 separate known sex differences that exist in the world and replicated them with power manipulations. So if men score higher on X than women, then people primed with high power score higher on X than people primed with low power. But there's a problem. Women have more constraints in how they can act with power. They face a double bind. So how do we solve that double bind? Well, we solve it in 3 ways. One of the first ways is we try to take out gender from the equation. How do we do that? Well, symphony orchestras have done that with blind auditions. They found that when we went to blind auditions, women went from less than 10% of major symphony orchestras in America to almost 50%.
You're kidding.
Because we basically listened to the music differently if we thought it was coming from a woman. The second thing we do is we actually use what's called accountability and transparency. Some of the work done by the United States government and other people have shown that if we just simply track outcomes for men and women in organizations and report those findings, we create motivation to end some of, let's say, the gender wage gap, for example. And then the third thing is there's a little bit of burden that's placed on women. So some of the great research that's done by Emily Amanatula down at Texas and Hannah Riley Bowles at Harvard, they've asked, can women solve the dilemma of they want to be ambitious in negotiations, but they want to lean in, but they don't want to get pushed back.
Right.
And one of the things they found is something called us advocacy. So think about who's allowed to advocate, what women are allowed to advocate really fiercely. Mothers on behalf of their kids, right? So it's like, think about becoming a mama bear, right? I'm doing this not just for me, but for all my children. And that allows, if you put women in that mindset that they're doing this, let's say I'm going in to ask for a raise at work. I'm not doing this just for me, I'm doing this for the other people in my life. Then they actually negotiate just as effectively as men do.
What are some ways to implement these fascinating research findings from the book in organizations? How do you put it into action?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's things that individuals can do and that people in organizations can do. So one of the things, like the power prime, thinking about time when you had power is one thing that you can use to give yourself, let's say, a boost of confidence, for example. Organizations can use a lot of these things by thinking, again, all of this is about knowledge is power, right? Understanding this. So for example, the baseball versus basketball test. Right? Do I want more talent or am I going to get too much talent? Another one is, how do I reduce gender discrimination? Well, if I put in place procedures like blind auditions, accountability and reporting and transparency, I can start to reduce that. We see all of these things get put into place. We may think, transparent pay is great, but as Maurice has shown in all of his research, is comparisons create all these type of problems. So maybe we don't want to reveal everyone's pay, but we still want to let people know where they stand. So how can we solve that? Well, we can say, here's the band, so you can know where you are, but I don't know how much you're making, so I don't feel particular resentment against you, for example.
Adam, thank you so
Sure.
much. We really appreciate you sharing with us today. We're looking forward to the book Friend and Foe. And thanks so much for being with us.
Great. Thank you so much.
This is Sarter TV. I'm Jennifer Crumpton. Thanks so much for stopping by and joining us today, and we'll see you next time.